It happened on the night I promised myself I'd stay invisible. The restaurant buzzed with soft laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint scent of rosemary and grilled salmon. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday evening, a treat to myself after another week of surviving in this tiny coastal town where everyone still remembered me as the girl who left and came back with nothing. I wasn't supposed to notice him. He was standing near the bar, back straight, one hand in his pocket, speaking to the manager with a voice low enough to make people lean in. He didn't belong here. Not in this town, not in that tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. And of course, because the universe has a wicked sense of humor, I was the one who walked into him, or rather, into his chest. The glass of red wine in my hand flew forward like it had been waiting its whole life for this exact disaster. The wine splashed across his white shirt, down his tie, blooming across the fabric like a violent flower. "Oh my God," I gasped, stepping back. "I'm so sorry, He looked down at his shirt, then up at me. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. Dark, but not empty. More curious. "Clearly," he said, voice calm, deep, a trace of something that wasn't quite annoyance. "Do you usually attack strangers with Cabernet, or am I just lucky?" I blinked. "Only the ones who look like they can afford dry cleaning." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You think that's funny?" I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. "No, I think I'm dying of embarrassment, actually." He looked at me a moment longer, too long, then removed his suit jacket slowly, shaking off a few drops. The restaurant manager appeared pale and anxious, but the man just raised a hand. "It's fine, Robert." That voice again, controlled, effortless authority. He turned back to me. "You owe me more than an apology." My stomach flipped. "Excuse me?" He gestured to his shirt. "That was an excellent vintage. I'll buy you another bottle." "Dinner," he said. "Tomorrow. You can apologize over dinner." I blinked again. "You're serious?" "Deadly." And with that, he walked away, through the side door, into the night, leaving me standing there, holding an empty glass, wondering what the hell had just happened. The next morning, I told myself it was a joke. No one like him, polished, self-contained, clearly from somewhere that had valet parking, would bother with someone like me. I was Ellie Grace Harper, 31, waitress at the same cafe where I'd worked in high school. After leaving New York 5 years ago, and leaving behind the version of myself that thought she'd be an artist, I'd come back to the only place that would take me. Still, at exactly 7 p.m., I found myself standing in front of the Lantern, the nicest restaurant in town, trying not to chew on my thumbnail. He was already there. Of course he was. He stood when he saw me, that same calm energy wrapped around him like expensive cologne. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure if you were serious." I rarely say anything I don't mean. The waiter pulled out my chair. I sat, still trying to decide if this was a date or a debt. "So," I said, forcing a smile. "Do I get to know the name of the man I've apparently wronged?" He leaned back slightly, regarding me with those unreadable eyes. "Luca Moretti." The name clicked somewhere in the back of my mind. The Moretti Construction Group had just bought half the old docks. Rumors said the new owner wasn't just rich, he was ruthless. I tried to sound casual. "You're buying the docks?" "Renovating them," he corrected. "People here don't realize how much potential this place has. It just needs someone willing to get their hands dirty, and you're that someone?" He smirked faintly. "I don't mind a little mess. I've dealt with worse." His gaze lingered, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that made my pulse trip over itself. We talked through dinner, or rather, he asked questions, and I stumbled through answers. He wanted to know why I came back, what I painted, what I missed most about New York. He never talked about himself. When I asked, he'd deflect with a look that said, "Not yet." By dessert, I realized he hadn't smiled once, but somehow the silence between us didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt charged. When the check came, I reached for my purse. "At least let me..." He shook his head. You've done enough. I frowned. I thought this was my apology. It was. He stood, sliding his hands into his pockets, but I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive you yet. He left me with that, and the quiet certainty that this man was a problem I didn't know how to solve. Days passed, but I couldn't shake him. Everywhere I went, the cafe, the grocery store, even my morning walks by the pier, I saw black suits, dark cars, reminders of him. Word spread quickly that Moretti was in town to stay. He'd bought the old Grant mansion on the hill, and half the town was buzzing with curiosity. I told myself I didn't care. Then he showed up at the cafe. I was carrying a tray of coffee mugs when the door chimed, and there he was, standing under the hanging plants, sunlight slicing across his sharp features. He didn't belong in a place that smelled like bacon grease and cinnamon rolls. He sat at the counter. Black coffee. I nodded, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Coming right up. When I set it down, he caught my wrist, gently, but enough to stop me. You're avoiding me. I'm working. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's not what I asked. I swallowed. Maybe I don't like owing people. He tilted his head. Then pay your debt. I looked at him, really looked. The controlled posture, the faint shadow under his eyes. There was a sadness there, quiet but heavy. What exactly do you want from me? I asked. He released my wrist slowly. A painting. That threw me. What? You said you're an artist? I used to be. Then start again. I almost laughed. You want me to paint you? He nodded once. You owe me something personal. That seems fair. I stared at him, trying to decide if he was serious. He was, and that's how it began. Every evening for the next 2 weeks, I drove up to the mansion on the hill, the one everyone said was haunted by its own history. The house had been empty for years, but under his direction, it was slowly coming alive again. He always met me at the door himself, always in black, always calm. I set up my easel in the old library, a cathedral of dust and light. He would sit in the armchair by the window, silent, watching me as I worked. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't. I learned that he'd lived in Chicago, that his mother was Italian, that he'd come to this town because it was quiet. I didn't ask what he was running from, but sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, like someone remembering how to breathe after years of holding it in. One evening, the sky outside turned copper, and I caught him watching me instead of the canvas. What? I asked. You paint like someone who survived something, he said quietly. I froze. Maybe I have. He nodded slowly, as if that was all he needed to know. When I finally showed him the portrait, unfinished, rough but alive, he stood for a long time, saying nothing, then softly, You saw me. And I didn't know what to do with that. The night it rained, I almost didn't go. Thunder rolled over the hills, and the road to the mansion was slick with mud. But something in me, curiosity, maybe something more dangerous, refused to stay home. When I arrived, the power was out. The only light came from candles flickering in the hall. He was there in the library, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, looking almost human for once. You shouldn't have come, he said, though his eyes betrayed relief. You think a little rain scares me? He smiled, truly smiled, for the first time. I'm beginning to realize nothing does. Lightning flashed behind him, illuminating the room in bursts of white. I set my bag down. I can finish the painting. He walked closer. Why are you really here, Ellie? The sound of my name in his voice made something inside me tighten. I hesitated. Because you make it hard to stay away. He exhaled slowly, like a man trying to control something he shouldn't. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I don't do well with things I can't have. The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. Then the lights flickered back on, and I saw the edge of vulnerability in his eyes vanish behind the wall again. I'll drive you home, he said. I wanted to protest, but the way he said it, protective, not commanding, made me nod. The drive down the hill was quiet. Rain tapped against the windshield like whispered secrets. Halfway to town, he spoke. You said you left New York because it stopped feeling like home. I looked out the window. Home isn't a place. It's the version of yourself you can live with. He was silent for a moment, then, and can you live with her now? I'm trying. He nodded. So am I. When he dropped me off, he didn't say goodbye, just looked at me for a long moment before driving away, and I realized I'd stopped wanting to apologize. The storm left our town scrubbed and rinsed, as if the sky were trying to give everyone a fresh start. The oak leaves hung heavy, the streets gleamed, and the fishermen hosed yesterday off their boats at dawn. I walked to the cafe with wet hair and a scarf, trying to shake the strange ache of the night before, trying not to think about how my name sounded in Luca's voice. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, the cafe bell chimed and his shadow fell across the counter again. He didn't sit this time. He stood just close enough for me to feel the gravity of him, like the air had thickened. You left the painting, I said, because I had to say something. It's safer there, he said. At your house? He paused. For now, as if everything was temporary, a bridge between storms. What do you want for lunch? I asked, choosing the safer language of menus and prices. On the house. You owe me more than an apology, he said quietly. No smile, no edge, just the line that had started this, only now it sounded different, threaded with something unguarded. Come to the docks at dusk. There's something you should see. Is it dangerous? I surprised myself with the question. Not if you stay near me. I didn't know whether he meant it as a promise or a warning. Maybe both. He left as quickly as he had come, and even when Mrs. Donnelly ordered her usual pie like a judge handing down a sentence, I could still feel him beside me like the imprint of a hand that hadn't touched me yet. Dusk found the docks bathed in that soft indigo that makes everything look softer, kinder. The skeletons of new beams held strings of work lights. The water moved with tired shoulders. I waited near the chain link gate until his car pulled in, headlights cutting through the mist. He stepped out wearing a coat, no tie, the night fitting around him like a secret he'd made peace with. What am I looking at? I asked. Possibility, he said. We walked along the planks he'd had replaced, past a heap of rusted anchors and a coil of new ropes still smelling of fresh fiber. A crane stood sleeping, a giant contraption with its forehead leaning on the dark. He slid his hands into his pockets as if to keep from reaching for anything. This was a shipping yard, he said, then a dumping ground. Everyone forgot it had a pulse. And you plan to resuscitate it, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, when the truth was it was beautiful. It was hard work in steel and timber. It was the opposite of the empty, glossy things I'd chased in New York. He nodded past the crane toward a long, low building where warm light pooled from the windows. I had the old warehouse cleared. The floors are good. He glanced at me. It could be a place for artists, studios, a weekend market. People need places to stand still, to make things that aren't transactions. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat. You say you're not sentimental, but I'm not, he said with a small curve of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile. I'm practical. If you give a town a reason to believe in its own hands again, they'll protect it. Businesses come because people are proud. It's self-preservation, not poetry. Maybe they're the same thing, I said. We reached the warehouse. Inside, workers were rolling up sheets of plastic and stacking paint cans. The space was huge. Great rafters overhead, wide windows, the smell of soap and sawdust. For a second, I saw the past. Men in caps, pallets dragged across these floors, a whole economy clattering and calling out. Then the vision shifted, and I saw easels, strings of lights, frames hung on brick, people leaning in with a glass of wine held to their chest to talk about brush strokes and grief. Luca, I turned. This is... For now, it's empty, he said. The door opened. A man in a hard hat stepped in, looked at Luca, then lowered his voice. They're here. Luca's posture changed. Nothing obvious, just a settling of shoulders, a stillness like water that realized it was being watched. He nodded at the man, who disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived. "Who's here?" I asked. "Investors," he said, but his eyes had cooled a degree. "Stay close." Two men walked in. They moved like they were measuring the floor to see how much of it was theirs. The taller one had a careful smile and an overcoat a shade too sleek for a town that still posted notes in its grocery window. The other was weathered, beautiful in the way that weather ruins things. Their footsteps made different sounds on the boards. You could hear what they valued by how they walked. "Mr. Moretti," the tall one said, "we had an understanding about the timeline." "We did," Luca said evenly. "Work continues. You'll have your returns when I say it's time." "Is that your specialty now?" the weathered one asked. "Telling men to wait for what they paid for?" Luca didn't bother to look at him. "You paid for a living project, not a fire sale. We paid for access," the tall one said. And then he turned his smile toward me, like a flashlight beam swung too fast. "And this must be the local color." "Don't," Luca said. It was just one word, but it pulled heat from the room. The tall man's smile thinned. "We're partners, Luca," he said. "Let's not pretend your conscience is a new invention." The second man ran his fingers along a beam as if checking for dust. "We thought you were ready to be reasonable." Luca's jaw flexed. "And I thought you were done trying to drag me backward." They looked at one another. Their silence spoke in a language I couldn't translate, but I understood the sound. I'd heard it when my old landlord in Brooklyn had told me he didn't accept art as currency. The men left after a few more polite threats dressed as compliments. The door swung shut and echoed. The workers pretended not to look. "What are you entangled in?" I asked when it was just us and the hum of the lights. "Old obligations," he said. "Some debts aren't owed in money." "You owe them?" He looked at the floor. "I owe the person I used to be the courtesy of not becoming him again." I wanted to step closer. I wanted to not ask questions, but when someone has a storm sitting on their ribs, you either pretend you don't see the lightning or you admit that you do. He drew a slow breath. "Tomorrow," he said, and his voice came out gentler. "There's a small autumn festival in the square. The town's first in years. Bring the portrait. Hang it here for the weekend. No price tag. Just let people see what this place does to a face." "This is my debt?" I asked, half light. "To help you prove something to men who think wood exists to be burned?" "No," he said, and finally there was a real smile, not perfect, but earned. "Your debt is to yourself. If you hang that painting, you stop living as the version of Ellie who says she used to be an artist. You go back to being the kind who doesn't ask permission." I realized that what had first hit me about him wasn't his suit or his eyes or his control. It was the way he said the word "you like." It contained a road back to somewhere I'd abandoned. "I'll bring it," I said. "But," I added, because the air felt too honest to lie in, "I'm not doing it for you." His gaze warmed in a way I felt in my throat. "Good," he said softly. "That makes two of us." I barely slept. I was afraid if I closed my eyes, the version of the future I just dared to imagine would vanish. Morning came with the sound of hammers from somewhere up the hill. This town was learning to wake up early again. I carried the portrait like a fragile secret, wrapped in a blanket the color of a storm cloud, out to my fading sedan. The drive to the warehouse skimmed along the shoreline. Gulls tossed themselves into the wind. The sun put a clean edge on the water. Inside, they'd hung temporary rails and lights. A woman with gray curls and a notepad gave me a hopeful look when I walked in. "Are you the one with the Moretti piece?" The question struck me so strangely, I almost laughed. "I suppose I am." I found a place by a window, hung the portrait, and stepped back. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't finished, but it was alive. I'd started with line and light, then let my brush do what my words couldn't, admit that he contained both hunger and restraint. The result looked like a man who was waiting to see if he deserved softness. Behind me, footsteps. I turned to see him, jacket over one arm, tie loose. He stood in front of his own face as if meeting a relative he didn't know he had. Every time I'd shown my work before, I'd watched people try to make sense of themselves on canvas. But watching him do it felt like watching a door open in a wall I'd assumed was load-bearing. After a long moment, his voice, quiet, steady. "You held me still long enough to look? Did I get you wrong?" He tilted his head. "You made me braver than I am." "Then maybe you are," I said. He didn't take his eyes off the portrait. "They'll try again," he said. "The men from last night. They'll try to make a point, with money, with rumors, with me." He glanced at me then. "Stay clear of them. If they come to the cafe, I can handle men with wallets," I said. "I know," he said, and something eased behind his eyes. "That's why I'm asking you to be careful anyway." The festival began with awkward music from the high school band and ended up, as all small-town things do, glorious in its refusal to be embarrassed about itself. People moved through the warehouse slowly, leaving pieces of themselves in their wake. A laugh, a question, a memory attached to a brick. Kids trailed sticky fingers along the walls. A couple argued in whispers about whether a photograph was sad or beautiful. Someone played a fiddle in a corner until the light turned honey. They stood in front of the portrait and did what people do when they want to say nothing and everything at once. They folded their arms, tilted their heads, sucked their teeth softly. Eventually, one by one, they offered their verdicts, not on him, but on themselves. A fisherman asked what color I used to make the shadow under his eyes, blue and a little green. A teacher said it looked like the moment before someone admits he needs help. Mrs. Donnelly, whose pie had judged me, put her hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything at all. When the men came, coats, smiles, checks in their pockets, they didn't bother with the art. They bothered with Luca. I saw them speak to him near the butler's door that had survived the warehouse's old life. They got close enough to count his eyelashes. Their voices were oil-thin, dangerous in their reasonableness. He listened. He said very little. He didn't move. If a storm lived under his ribs, he'd made it sit. After, he found me outside where the air was cooler. "It'll be fine," he said, possibly to me, possibly to himself. "If you need help," he shook his head. "No one helps without paying later. I won't make your success cost you anything you don't choose to give." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at me, like he was choosing. Then he declined the call. "What if I choose to give something?" I asked. "What if I choose to stand next to you? Then I'll make sure the ground under your feet is solid," he said, and somehow it sounded like a vow and an apology at once. That night, the portrait stayed in the warehouse, the doors locked. A guard sat on a stool with a thermos and a paperback. The town slept, proud in the way towns get proud when they remember they can make a thing together. In the morning, the portrait was gone. It wasn't subtle. There was the clean square on the wall where it had been, the hooks empty like hands. The guard was apologizing so hard he ran out of ways to rearrange the same words. I just stepped out, 5 minutes, maybe 3, my daughter called. Her car, Mr. Moretti. Luca's face had the kind of stillness that makes people quiet on their own. He didn't ask for security footage. He didn't blame the man. He just stood looking at the ghost of the portrait like he was learning a new language by listening to its silence. "Why this?" I asked finally. "It's not even finished?" "That's precisely why it's valuable," he said, voice even. "Because it's not the thing they can resell to men who've never bled. It's the thing that hurt before it became beautiful. They want to remind me that whatever I try to build will always owe them its bones." Rage rose so fast I could taste metal. "So what do we do?" "We don't," he said. "I do." He made some calls. He sent the guard home. He told the gray-curled woman to shut the warehouse for the afternoon. Then he turned to me. "Go to the cafe," he said. "Make coffee. Look like your life is small." "What about your life?" I asked. He smiled without humor. "Mine was built on being very good at making men underestimate me." He left. I did as I was told, because I'd learned the hard way that courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like buttering toast while your heart is a hive. By noon, a dark sedan idled by the curb. The tall man got out. He came in wearing the wrong kind of shoes for our floors, and his smile was the wrong kind for our town. Black coffee, he told me, as if it were a test. Coming right up, I said, as if I'd studied for it. He didn't look at me, but at the shelf where Mrs. Donnelly's pie cools. It's a shame when people forget their place, he said to the room. I wouldn't know, I said. He sipped his coffee. Where's your friend? Which one? The one who thinks wood grows on money. I believe it's the other way around, I said. He laughed, delighted I could play, as if I were a clever raccoon stealing his lunch. You're entertaining, he said. No wonder Luca thinks he can change the rules for you. Men don't usually change rules for me, I said. They change them when they realize the rules didn't love them back. He set the cup down. Tell Mr. Moretti that if he wants his painting, he should remember how we retrieve lost things in our line of work. He tapped the saucer with one fingernail, efficiently. He left cash that was more insult than tip, and the door chimed and sighed behind him like the punctuation mark on a sentence I didn't want to read. I called Luca. He was here. I know, he said. He won't be there again. Luca, you'll see me tonight, he said, and hung up. I saw him hours later at the warehouse. The guard was back. The gray-curled woman with her notepad stood near the door, trying not to look like a sentry. Luca walked in with a small, wrapped canvas and a longer breath in his chest than earlier. You got it, I said, relief breaking over me before I could gather it. He set the canvas on a table and unwrapped it. It wasn't my painting. The face was wrong in ways that someone looking fast wouldn't see. They'd copied my strokes, my palette, even my signature curve of light on the cheekbone. But the man in this version had none of his contradictions. They'd made him simpler, which was to say, they'd made him someone else. Where? I said. They tried to sell this back to me, he said, as proof of favor. The original is safe. Where? I asked. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. With a friend. Someone who doesn't answer to the men you met. Why didn't you? Because if I put it back on the wall, they would take it again. And next time, they'd want collateral with a pulse. The room tilted. Me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Silence stretched. He looked at me like a man rescuing a thing he took too long to admit he wanted. I'm leaving, he said quietly. For a while. The words found the bruise I'd been ignoring. When? Tonight. It was absurd. It was the way the ground moves under you in a dream. Because of them. Because of me, he corrected. Because I brought them here when I thought I could manage what I used to be with the discipline of who I am now. That's not balance. That's arrogance. I wanted to hold on to anger. It's easier to store than grief. So you burn down your own house before someone else can light a match? No, he said, and for the first time his voice broke, just enough to show me the cost of holding it steady for so long. I'm asking you to keep the lights on while I go dig up the lines I never cut. How? I have leverage I haven't used, he said. Names for names. Contracts with clauses written in ink I pretended was invisible. I'm going to Chicago to end the version of the story where they follow me into every town and try to tax my future with my past. And if they don't let you end it? I asked. He stepped closer. Not to touch me, but to keep me from having to raise my voice to reach him. You painted me the way I want to be seen, he said. Let me earn it. I threw my hands up, helpless. And what do I do in the meantime? Hang a forgery and pretend it's a metaphor? You open the warehouse every weekend, he said, half a smile aching. You let people come in and believe in their own hands. You make coffee and get paint under your nails. And when anyone asks where I am, you say, tying up loose ends. What if they don't believe me? Then you say it again. He took a breath like a swimmer before a long distance. The original painting, my friend will bring it back when it's safe. It belongs to you until it's ready to be seen again. What if I need you? I said. I didn't mean to say it. But then again, I hadn't meant to spill wine on him either, and here we were. He closed his eyes for a second, enough time to make a prayer. You owe me more than an apology, he said softly, and when he opened them, there was no arrogance left, only a man like the one on my canvas. Promise me you won't wait for me like a story with an inevitable ending. Live like I might never come back, and if I do... His voice thinned into the kind of hope that makes something bloom where it never bloomed before. Let me find you busy. I don't want to be a lesson in your redemption arc, I said. I want to be a person you choose in daylight. Then be her, he said, so I can. He left with a bag and a kiss he didn't put on my mouth or my forehead or my hand, but into the space between us where it would sit without wearing my skin like a promise that needed keeping. I didn't wait like furniture, I waited like weather. I opened the warehouse every Saturday and Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesdays when the fishermen weren't out because the wind said no. I taught a kid named Mateo how to stretch a canvas using pliers and patience. I stopped saying used to be. I sold small pieces and kept the bigger ones because they were the ones that hurt, and I wanted proof that I could live with the things that demanded more from me than money. The men in wrong shoes came back. Twice, then less often, then not at all. Rumors curled through town like smoke. Chicago was loud that winter. Newspapers from places we didn't belong to had names we recognized in their headlines. Some contracts were declared void. Some men learned that access isn't a synonym for ownership. A name we all knew was indicted. Another one disappeared into a country without an extradition treaty. The town pretended not to read. The town read everything. In early spring, a package arrived for me. There was no return address, only my name in a hand I knew, the letters disciplined like his voice. Inside, a small metal object wrapped in cloth. I unfolded it to find one of the hooks from the warehouse wall, the one that had held his portrait the night before it vanished. It was attached to a length of old rope with a note tied to it. For the day you put me back up, on our terms. There was no signature. He didn't need one. That night, I took the hook to the warehouse. The boards creaked familiar hello. I climbed the small ladder and screwed the hook back into the beam with a stubbornness that belonged to both of us. I opened the windows so the sea could throw its voice in with mine. Then I hung an empty frame from the hook and wrote on the wall below it, in pencil, small, reserved for the art that returns to us after we learn to deserve it. The next morning, the gray-curled woman cried when she saw it. The fisherman nodded once and touched his cap. Mateo took a photo for his mother, who said the frame looked like a door we could use when the regular one stuck. Life in our small place did what life does. It moved. I woke to gulls and hammers. I went to bed smelling like lemon oil and turpentine. I painted a series called Things That Survive Weather. A buoy, a face, a hand gripping a rope, a pair of boots with the tide licking at them as if the ocean had decided to practice restraint. I missed him like a song you're not sure you heard or dreamed. But I missed him while doing things, and because of that, the missing didn't eat me. It fed me in small, disciplined bites. The portrait came back in June. It arrived with no ceremony, like a truth that had been patient. The gray-curled woman called me, breathless, and I ran the 2 blocks from the cafe, apron still tied behind me, flower on my cheek I didn't know was there. There it was, on the table, wrapped in the same storm-colored blanket I had first given it. There was a note on top, 2 words, strong as the harbor pilings. It's time, no signature. He didn't need one. I hung it while the light was good. The frame clicked on the hook as if the wall recognized its weight and adjusted its spine. People came. They stood in front of it quietly, as if not to wake something. I stood behind them, heart kicking, trying not to pretend the present was a memory. An hour later, a man stepped into the doorway, not in a coat this time. In a soft blue shirt with sleeves rolled and forearms tanned the way arms only get when the work is under an honest sun. He'd shaved the night before. He looked like someone who'd finally slept. He didn't walk toward the painting. He walked toward me. You look like the person I wanted to meet in this town, he said, as if we were mid-conversation, as if winter were a door you don't slam but ease shut behind you. And you look, I said, like the man I painted and then refused to edit. His eyes flicked past me to the portrait, then back. They took some things. I took more back. Did you end it? I asked. He considered the question as if it were a knot. I ended enough of it to begin this. The gray-curled woman pretended to reorganize a stack of brochures. Mateo stared openly from behind an easel. The fisherman cleared his throat the way men do when they're about to pretend they weren't looking. Luca's voice lowered. "May I?" he asked, and when he reached for me, it wasn't possessive or performative. It was simply a man who'd learned something about cost, asking to touch what he hadn't earned yet. I nodded. He took my hand. It felt like the kind of warmth that sneaks up on you, not the kind that tries to set the room on fire. We didn't kiss there. We didn't need to. We stood in front of the portrait together, me and the man in it and the man beside me, and watched people do what small towns do when they've decided to offer you a second chance. They adopted him by forgiving me first, and forgiving him by letting me be happy where they could see it. Later, when the light slid toward evening and the warehouse emptied of footsteps, when the fiddler had packed up and the broom had made neat piles out of the day's dust, he walked me to the door. On the sill, taped on the inside where only we would see it, was a small square of paper I hadn't put there. His handwriting again, spare and sure. Ours. I looked at him. The dock? He shook his head once. The debt, he said, and the word didn't sound like a ledger anymore. It sounded like the softness you owe yourself when you finally stop punishing the part of you that wanted more. What does that make us? I asked. 2 people, he said, who are done apologizing for being found. We stepped out into the evening. The tide reached for the pilings like a patient hand. The town hummed with the kind of work that is its own prayer. He didn't make a grand speech. He didn't say forever or promise a future he hadn't earned. He looked at the life I'd built without him, and he let me keep it. Then he stood next to me anyway. When I told him I'd spilled wine on him the night we met because fate had terrible aim, he laughed the kind of laugh that makes a room remember what it's for. "No," he said, "you spilled it because you were always going to find me. Fate just didn't want to admit it needed help." We walked, and the conversation meandered through practicalities and plans and the kinds of questions you don't think to ask until someone's hand fits into your day better than it fits into a pocket. We passed the cafe, still warm from the oven. We passed the hardware store where the display of doorknobs in the window looked like an art installation for people who loved possibility. We passed a boy on a bike who wove around us like a ribbon, and I realized that my life had not split into before and after, as if he were a line drawn across a page. My life had gathered itself into something that could carry both, the woman who left and the woman who stayed, the man who had been owned and the man who now belonged to himself, the town that had lost and the town that was learning to harvest more than fish. We didn't hurry. There was no need. The water said the same word over and over to the shore like a prayer with no end and no beginning, and I finally understood that ours wasn't a claim. It was a circle. It was the shape your life makes when the thing you thought would wreck it becomes the reason it holds. That night, I fell asleep with paint on my fingers and the scent of the sea in my hair. In the morning, I would open the warehouse, sweep the floor, adjust the lights, and make sure the hook held. I would sell a small canvas to a woman who wanted something on her wall that reminded her the wind could be argued with. I would teach Mateo to mix a green that didn't make the ocean look like a lie. I would pour coffee into cups for people who needed warmth more than caffeine. And sometime between those things, a certain man would walk in wearing a shirt the color of a sky that kept its promises, and he would say my name in a way that made the room feel older and newer and not empty. And I would look up and know that an apology was the worst way to measure what we were. We had spilled, we had stained, we had learned to live with the color, and finally, that was enough.